This is episode 48 of the Tomato Timer, and I'm excited to invite an inspiring guest and a fellow One Young World ambassador to this episode. Madhav is the founder of Green the Gene, a project he started as an 8-year-old, an environmental club which has turned into the world's largest completely youth led organization fighting environmental crises around the world through data driven and low cost technology solutions. Madhav, it's really, really good to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So, Madhav, we have to start right at the beginning, right? An 8-year-old starts a club and he has continued to develop and grow it over so many years and had such an incredible impact. Tell us what kind of triggered the idea and then what led you to continue to put your energy towards this until now.
Sure. So I think it starts back when I was 8, right? So I grew up in a part of India that is essentially sort of affected by water scarcity all year round. We don't get a lot of rainfall, and back then the water infrastructure around it wasn't really great. Uh, what that meant was that while growing up, there were times where there was citywide water rationing, and in fact, I remember a summer where my mom had to sort of turn on like different sorts of, like essentially like a way to pull water from like the official
Mm,
pipeline into our tanks so that we had water at home.
yeah.
And so that was a very interesting experience growing up. I never really understood or realized what that was or why that was necessary. But then one fine day, we had this environmental science class back when I was in third grade, 8 years old, uh, where our teacher told us that the water table in this part of the country where I grew up was falling by 2 feet every year. I didn't
Mm,
really understand that. I didn't really know what 2 feet means or what the implications or something like that
yeah.
were. But that suddenly stuck with me, right? That made me realize that okay, that might be related to the fact that people are finding it harder to draw water, right? So that might be related to why water access is becoming a problem for communities and people I know, and then that suddenly connected the dots.
Mhm.
So that took this abstract problem of like climate change and sustainable development into this very, very sort of concrete thing that I realized affects people.
Mm.
Um, and that was sort of the inspiration that pushed me to start Green the Gene. We started really, really small and simple. It was uh, basically me convincing 3 friends, and we planted like 6 trees right outside our schoolyard. That's how we got started.
Amazing. And it's incredible to hear. It makes a lot of sense as well that you localize a problem. To think about the SDGs in a very kind of in a vacuum essentially is overwhelming because they're such huge problems. But as soon as you localize it and think about, hey, what's affecting my community on a day-to-day basis, it starts to kind of become like these are the problems and these are the solutions. Um, that's amazing. And then you continue to grow it. So what was that trigger point or that tipping point where you thought, hey, this is something I want to continue pursuing my energy into?
Um, I think that was sort of interesting. I never actively made that decision that right,
Okay.
this is something I want to
Yeah.
continue long term. It just sort of happened organically. We slowly and gradually, continued growing. It's been 16 years now. Um, and so it's been like this slow journey of growth where more and more people got interested. Initially, it was just people from our school, from our class, people who saw what we were doing. They're like, hey, can we get involved? We'd be like, of course, that'll be amazing. So there were more people who started joining, and when more people started joining, we thought, okay, we can probably try something a little more ambitious, right?
Yeah.
We can probably go beyond just planting trees. So we tried that, and so on, and slowly we started to sort of take on bigger problems. What at least was one inflection point along this journey was that at one point, we tried to recycle swimming pool water from our school. So our school had like this swimming pool, and at the end of every summer, like at the end of like over swimming season, they'd essentially let water run off and then refill that pool next year, right? So that was very significant water wastage. So we thought, hey, can we recycle this? Can we maybe like figure out a way to dechlorinate this and then use this in like in some sort of a public park or a garden or something, just to maybe water plants.
Hmm.
Um, w- w- so that was also sort of the first time we tried to use some form of technology. We spoke to a few people, tried buying like like a few pipes in art. Eventually, we did get it to work. Though it turned out to be much harder than we thought.
Mm,
Uh, but I think that was a key inflection point. That's why we realized that what we're building isn't just for us. It can work for a lot of people,
mm,
and it doesn't really have to be localized. And one thing that helped us sort of on that journey of growing as an organization was this project got some visibility. We had the opportunity to share this at one of back then the UNEP or United Nations Environment Program had international children's conferences uh, where we had an opportunity to share this, and that's where we really realized that there's just so many people out there who face similar challenges, similar
mhm,
problems. And so we can really scale these solutions, right? We can sort of work together and that'll act as this sort of a magnification effect, right? That'll act as an impact multiplier,
mm.
where instead of just addressing this problem in one place, we can do that with many people in many different places. And that I think was a key inflection point for us in that journey.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it brings me to a question I was going to ask you a bit later, but it's such a fitting point to talk about it right now. You talk about low cost technology solutions as well as data driven solutions. What does that mean, and what is this? How is this different from conventional
Oh, I think
solutions
I've lost you.
to environmental crises?
Um,
Still here for me, Madhav?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm sorry, my internet might be a little flaky. I'm not sure what's going on, but could you
That's all right.
maybe repeat the last 30 seconds?
Absolutely. So I was just wanting to ask you a little bit more about the differences with which way you're approaching this problem using data-driven solutions and low-cost technology versus what is conventionally being used by corporates or other organizations to tackle climate change, essentially.
Mhm.
Like this space is getting quite busy, I think, with a lot of new players trying to enter. What do you guys do differently, and why is it important, this low-cost angle, this localized grassroots solution or volunteer model? What is important and what is crucial for the future?
Definitely. I think there are multiple aspects to this. So let me try
Mhm.
and unpack that a little bit. One of the big things is that, first off, additional players coming into the space is amazing. I mean, this is a massive global scale problem which needs as
Yeah.
much attention as it can get, as much resources, support, help, all of that. So it's just amazing that this is something that people are caring more and more about, and they're sort of
Mhm.
focusing their efforts in trying to solve it. And so that ties into sort of why we do what we do. Uh, Fundamentally, we realize that climate change is this incredibly large, complex problem, and we can't solve it alone. Uh, that is something that needs multi-stakeholder solutions. It needs corporations, governments, private sector, civil society, all sorts of groups to come together and really sort of work together in solving systemic issues.
Yeah.
However, in that process, there are communities across the world who are in immediate crisis situations. So, for instance, if there is a policy change, typically effects can take up to decades to really be felt.
Correct.
In that time period, there are people who don't have access to safe water or who have to walk like 7-8 kilometers just to sort of just to have water to drink, and
Mm.
those are sort of very critical, pressing local issues that are very specific to communities, uh, but are urgent. They need immediate solutions. They can't really wait for that decade, or they can't really wait for the implications of that policy to start affecting them. Um, and that's where we focus. So we try and build ultimately what are in some sense band-aids to this very large problem, but focused on
Mhm.
very, very local areas. So we in fact partner very closely with local communities across the world, um, sort of try and deeply understand the problems that they're facing, and then build tailored solutions to help address those. So one big example for that is around water filtration, where we built these sort of super low cost filtration devices that allow people to really just use water that they have access to, but then pass it through these devices, filter it, make it actually safe for consumption and for usage.
Yeah.
Um, so these are the solutions that are sort of targeted towards these really specific problems that are being faced in specific parts of the world in specific communities. We're not really trying to sort of build a one size fits all solution here.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that's where our approach differs slightly. It's more focused on how do we sort of alleviate immediate issues? And
correct.
low cost becomes a very critical tool for doing that. It helps us scale. So both the technology aspect as well as the affordability aspect play a very major role in making sure that what we're building is we can deliver sort of the maximum impact per dollar. We can get our solution to as many people who need it as possible. Um, so I think the affordability angle plays a very major role there, given obviously that as a nonprofit, we are always sort of constrained by our fundraising and the resources that we have access to.
Yeah, which brings me to my next question, which is around the volunteer model. And
Mhm.
you guys have over 7,000 volunteers. That's huge. And just kind of with ZNotes also having a similar approach to some of its contribution and volunteer processes, I know how hard it is to manage and to be able to convert volunteer hours and time into impact, especially considering the commitments that other people have, the fact that they are taking time out of their days to give back, and they're part of they embrace that social mission which you have and what Xenos has, but they're limited. So I want to understand from an organizational perspective, how have you developed it so that you can still have this volunteer model, but actually be so um, continue to have it, continue to grow and have so many different volunteers contribute to the overall mission.
Definitely, and I think that's a hard problem that we've spent a lot of time trying
Mm,
to figure out and really experiment with. Ultimately, I think one of the big, like, sort of probably the biggest factor that has enabled us to have the impact that we've had as an organization is just that I'm fortunate to work with an incredible group of really passionate people who care very deeply about these problems,
yeah.
who sort of understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and they really want to be a part of,
Mm,
building those solutions. And I think that happens because of multiple different reasons. One is that we try and work very directly with affected communities. We try and partner with them in this entire process, all the way from ideating to building these solutions to the sort of tech that goes into it to all the way to like actually delivering and deploying these so
mm,
that people can start using them. And so we work very closely with volunteers from affected communities in this entire process. And I
mhm,
think given that people who are sort of very deeply familiar with these problems um, are also, people who are very deeply passionate about sort of helping and working together to solve them. So that's one aspect. The other is that we've really structured the organization in a super decentralized manner, uh, which means that really we don't really rely on very centralized decision making. Um, and so that means that, on the ground, volunteers and teams can really drive projects the way they think, is the best way to go. And that allows for really a lot of ownership for every single volunteer
mhm,
across the board. It allows for a lot of, decision making, really driving things. And ultimately, I think that's worked out really well for us for multiple reasons. One, that there's no dependence on on like a central person or a central body to make things, which means people can work much faster. There's far less sort of dependence and blocking, etc.
yeah.
Um, there's far less red tape in some sense, but then also people on the ground really have the best understanding of the problems. So they're really best equipped to make those decisions. So I think that combination of sort of organizational structure coupled with just incredible people has worked out really well for us.
Yeah, what I hear is that great people plus empowering those great people, and that combination is perfect. um, That's awesome. And I want to kind of move on to you as well, because you were also essentially our type of volunteer as well, even if you sit at the head of it. And you continue to pursue your degree along the time of developing Green the Gene, and now your full-time job as well. So first of all, like, studying a CS degree isn't easy. How were you able to manage your time with your personal kind of development, green the gene, and your university degree?
That's definitely been a juggling act, and I
Yeah.
mean, it's probably there've been ups and downs. So there are times where I'm like, okay, something has to drop. Like I can't really do all of this. There have been those weeks. Um, but I think ultimately what's really let not just me, but like across the board. So we're 100% volunteer run, which means that all of our volunteers, everybody who's leading different parts of the organization, different functions, is either in university or is like early careers starting in their full-time roles and working
Mhm.
with Clean the Gene in a volunteer capacity. So it was critical for us to sort of even think of this systemically and see how we can make sure that no one person is burdened with too much. The way we've tried to make that happen is that nobody has to spend more than roughly 6 hours a week on projects with Green the Gene. Obviously, that varies quite a bit. Right? There are times where you have to get something done, and then things
Yeah.
can you know really go crazy, and then you have like a lot of people working very hard for like a specific time period just to deliver something on time. So I think those we've had those experiences and we've learned from them. Um, but I think ultimately it did come down to us sort of trying to address this systemically so that nobody is in that position where they have to sort of where they can't take on other things, right? So where they can't manage their full-time career or their university, etc. For me specifically, I think is also it also tied into the fact that I was able to use a lot of what I was learning in college, right, as part of my CS degree. I was able to use a lot of that here in the technology that we developed. So, for instance, our water filtration, for example, depends quite heavily on a lot of sensors and a lot of applied AI. Just to make sure that the water that is output that comes out of the device is actually safe and usable. So I think just that sort of cycle where I was able to use things that I learned in one place and the other really helped sort of reinforce both experiences.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense, and I'm really like I think that that kind of fact or the way you built into it that no one volunteer has to spend a certain amount of time per week, that is hugely helpful. I think just so that it allows each one to pursue their own kind of activities and not sacrifice. The opportunity cost isn't great. You're trying to build around your free time. So you just started working on a new project, or more like a project which is kind of spun out of Green the Gene, Nostos Homes. I'd love to learn a little bit more about it, and also understand how what are you taking from the learnings of a successful project into this new one.
Absolutely. So this is super exciting. We started building this towards the middle of last year, and now we're very close to doing our pilot and really launching this. So, Nostos homes are, these fully collapsible, flat packable, modular sort of homes designed
Hmm.
specifically for people who are displaced, forcibly displaced, either due to the effects of natural disasters or are fleeing from violence. Uh, so this is sort of why we're building these. A lot of people who are displaced from their homes essentially
Mhm.
uh, are forced to live in survival mode situations. So
Yeah.
in very transient housing, in tents, sometimes even lack of that. So that has effects that go far beyond just the roof over their head, right? So that means typically losing access to education, to livelihood, not having access to clean water, not having access to sanitation. So it has this ripple effect on a
Yeah.
lot of things, on like on health, on employment, on just being able to sort of l- or just having access to the sort of life that you did have access to, that all of that suddenly disappears, and that
Mm.
also comes at great psychological safety costs, which then prevent people from sort of trying to move out of those situations. We hope that Nostos Homes acts as this mechanism to break that cycle of survival mode living,
Mhm.
and really it gives people uh, the closest thing to a home in such a situation. Uh, so in terms of learnings from CleanZine, I think we've taken quite a bit. We're 100% volunteer driven on this as well, and we've got an incredible team of really passionate people
Hmm.
working on this problem uh, on multiple different aspects, all the way from sort of designing this to working with communities to figuring out how this will be manufactured and delivered, and all of that across the board. Another big thing that I think we've taken is we're focusing right off the bat on figuring out how do we really scale this. So how do we make sure that um, we are not fundamentally limited by like purely by fundraising or by sort of donations, even though obviously we do function as a nonprofit. So we're still trying to figure that out. We don't have great
Hmm.
answers yet, but that's something that we've started to focus on right off the bat with this project. So I think that's been a super interesting experience, really building this out. And we're hoping to launch this and have this on the ground, hopefully in the next few months, as a pilot in, southwestern parts of India in the flood affected area.
Yeah, sounds amazing. And I think the scalability aspect of it is critical, right? And it's important that whatever solution we start to develop, it's great to make something really fancy and really expensive, but then that is only supporting or able to support a very very small group of people. So it's challenging. I think I can imagine to build something from the get go to be scalable is not is a difficult task, but and it probably feels overwhelming to be thinking about all the different inputs and outputs and all the processes that are involved to make sure that they continue to grow and continue to scale up when demand increases. Um, I guess coming to the end of the episode, but before we do, I want to like just learn about what your kind of just personally what your next kind of goals and ambitions are. Um, because you're managing a whole bunch of things, you've always been involved in multiple projects. Is this how you imagine yourself to be? Is there anything else that's kind of interesting for you to look into?
I think I've been super excited about the intersection of technology and climate. And I very fundamentally believe that solutions to climate change would have very strong technical components, right? And I think that again ties back into the fact that they have to be scalable, they
Hmm.
have to be affordable, they have to be accessible, across the board. So
Yeah,
it's not a problem that can be solved for a group of people. It really has to be solved for everyone. And I think that tech would be a key enabler in that, obviously, in addition to a lot of other aspects that have to, play their part. Um, so I am very excited about continuing to sort of explore that intersection of tech as well as sustainability and climate change. So hopefully, we'll continue working on that
yeah,
dimension. Nostos is one such piece, and hopefully, we'll also be able to, at least in the near term, scale that up quite a bit over the course of the next year. So that's another thing that I'm really looking forward to.
yeah. Well, Madhav, it's been so amazing to have you, and it's been so lovely to hear your story from the beginning till where you have got to now, and your continuing kind of ambitions and future plans. But I think one thing we would love for you to leave as a takeaway almost is your experience and what one piece of advice you would leave to, especially young people who are impassioned about a cause, whether it's climate change or other kind of social challenges, and whether it's local or global, it doesn't matter. A volunteer model, a not-for-profit model, these are sometimes frowned upon, especially because they seem uh, unscalable. They seem like they're difficult to continue to grow. And you've proven over the many years that it's something that you can do and achieve huge impact with. So what would you like kind of share with our young people who are listening out there?
I think my sort of biggest sort of piece of advice or note or whatever you'd call it would be really just get involved, to actually sort of make that jump and start something. If
Hmm.
there's a problem that you care about, whether it's in your community, whether it's broader, it's just really worth trying to figure out how you can actually just get started and make a dent in it. It doesn't have to be a very structured approach. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to like, register an entity or those are things that you can always deal with later. But I
Hmm.
think it's really critical that if you see a problem that you care about, it's just that you get started, like just start doing things, and then you'd see a lot of support come in. You'd see a lot of encouragement across the board. Obviously, none of that journey is easy, but it's just super critical to actually, make that effort. That's really the only way where we all of us make progress, and that's really the only way we can sort of improve things and try and solve these problems that we see. So even if you do that, like in a super part-time capacity, while juggling a lot of other things, if you do that as a volunteer, or if you want to like start a proper full-fledged entity and work full-time, or anywhere on that spectrum, really,
Yeah.
it's super important to just start.
Yes. Get started. Amazing. Thank you so much, Madhav. It's been incredible having you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Take care, man. Bye bye.